Greetings and welcome to another Time for Tea podcast. I actually have to say, I've only got a glass of water here at the moment, so I don't even have a cup of tea. I am delighted to be joined all the way from the other side of the USA by Val. Hiya.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for coming on board and having a chat. Now, before we learn a bit about you in terms of what you do for your day job, and all of that other stuff and the technology we're going to talk about, I have two fundamental important questions I need to ask you before we go any further. First of all, are you a coffee or a tea person?
Answer is a little more complicated. Coffee for morning, tea for nighttime.
Okay, very good, very good. Oh, I think I've got half a vote for my tea campaign there. Then that's very cool. And my second question is favorite ice cream flavor.
Great question. I'm going to go for Nochola.
I say, very good. That's the first one of them we've had. I think that's very good. Cool. Okay, so first of all, just tell me right now where you are.
I am currently a broadcast engineer at Netflix. I started a month ago this week, so it feels like 7 years within a year.
Very, very cool. And give us a little bit of your background. What's brought you to the place where you are now with the role you've got now? Just give us unpack where you've come from and what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela, so very far from where I am right now. I went to school for telecom engineering, which is a regular bachelor back then, which I saw a little bit of everything, a little bit of networking, a little bit of RF, a little bit of compression, a little bit of even like satellite and mobile TV. And eventually I decided that I was going to be a network engineer. So when got my CCNA, well, I'm deep into the network side of the house. And I think, life happened. My family was exiled from our country, came to the States, and, like any other immigrant, came here and had to do anything to be alive and be awake. Okay. So my family and I just started working. I work as a barista in a coffee shop. I work in a call center, babysit kids, did a little bit of everything. And one day I received a call from MLB. I had applied to many, many, many jobs. And this job was not particular an IT help desk. It was a broadcast operations engineer. They told me it was a seasonal job just because it was through the baseball season in New York. And I was like, you know what? Might as well. Grab my bag, move to New York. And this happened March 9, 2020. If you can make your,
Oh,
your math,
yes.
it was literally 4 days before or after actually pandemic like closed and shut down the world completely. So it was a very interesting year for me. I worked for MLB for like 10 hours for the first couple months. And then when they decided to do the actual bubble season, I was brought up into the office and ended up designing and helping to get through the entire season. So ended up really, really working really, really well for me. After that, Fox contacted me and as they were looking for young people who had a lot of network background to help bring the broadcast and the distribution engineering teams up to speed with 2110. Never heard of 2110 before, but I had all of my network protocols is still in my head and moved up into the Tempe facility in Arizona. And there, just realized what 2110 was and ended up just shaping the systems for Fox for 4 years. So took upon contribution, took upon distribution, help a lot with the cross connectivity between all of their offices for Fox Sports, Fox News, Fox Entertainment, and bring everything into the corporation. So ended up like designing the 2110 to be a lot of what it is today with a lot of vendors. And then after that, Netflix found me and offered me a position that I was not looking for and ended up being a great opportunity. Now I'm based in LA, have been working for Netflix for almost a year. Right now I'm building infrastructure like the broadcast operations center and our in just points of presence. So that's a little bit of how I got here.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it was great to get to know you a bit at the our customer council that we had a couple of months ago. In the US, which was I thought really fun, and I thought there was some great discussion we had there. I love those kind of set aside times when there's no distractions and you can actually just brainstorm stuff. So thank you for your contributions to that. That's been really good.
Absolutely.
So I think it strikes me that you've kind of developed quite a passion for this area. Is that a fair observation?
It's absolutely a great observation. There's something magical about the adrenaline that you have to support a live event, especially sports. I think it's such a magnificent part to be part of.
Yeah, yeah. And now you're working in Netflix. I know you obviously can't go into details, but give us just some headlines of the kind of stuff you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is probably very known. Like Netflix, it's such a rich entertainment house and powerhouse that we're not only looking for the traditional sports, we're also looking for the X factor or the Netflix factor and all of the entertainment that we're kind of like proposing to have live. So where I sit right now at Netflix is a lot of helping operations and production to make their dreams come true, making sure that our infrastructure can reach any type of the globe where they want to connect to and where they want to, have a production from. So right now and also like at the same time, like bring what broadcast is to the software side. So it's a lot of translation from like what we've done and what the industry has come from, broadcast cable, everything that come before streaming, and then apply that into a real nice ecosystem that has been built for so many years on the infrastructure side.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. I think obviously I think you've come at the industry from a different position that I did, because I mean I've been in this industry for about 35 plus years now, and very much I grew up. I mean we were literally doing some of the first PCM digital
Yeah.
codecs, uncompressed codecs when I first joined. And I've kind of lived through all of that journey from really basically coming from the end of pure analog with no digital stuff whatsoever, and very much a broadcast engineering head. Whereas now, most people need to have almost, in fact, when we recruit, a lot of what I look for is IP and IT skills over and above broadcast skills, because that's what we need to make stuff happen. So I guess you've come in from that IP IT networking side into the broadcast arena. Have you any kind of anecdotal observations of how that looks from the angle that you've come in from in the last 10 years or so, relatively recently?
Yes, I would say I remember when I first started working with 2110 and older generations were trying to understand what 2110 was. I had to use a lot of like baseband expressions to kind of like relate one to the other, right? Like and like even like with I remember doing so many diagrams where it's like imagine that you have three different signals. Like it's not just one now. You're demultiplexing your signal. And then you just leave it demultiplexing and just set it like that. And that's how it works. I think another big piece of it, right, is understanding like the difference between like multicast traffic versus unicast traffic was a big of a challenge for a lot of people, right? Because like coming from the legacy broadcast, like you just plug a cable in back and forth, and if you connect to it, you can see what's going on. The signal, all of your specs are there, right? Whereas from an IP network, there are so many other like troubleshooting steps that you have to think about, right? It's not like is PTP like actually working fine in that specific interface that you have? Is the line card in your router okay? Or is there like a multicast flood going on? Is it oversubscribed? Right. So I think from the IP world, it brings such a complexity in a way, but for me, it's so beautiful because you can actually dissect so much easier, in my opinion. But from my lens, I think IP makes our industry have so much more flexibility.
Mm.
And I think also 2110 just opened up a little can of worms for us to actually expand that further, right? Now we move into like 2110 is the future, and now 2110 is kind of like being moved into like MXL, right? Like how are we going to transfer all of our data without actually having to uncompress and compress and move towards like the dash 20, 30s and 40s of the world?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack there. But you seeing as you mentioned 2110, and I was very involved in the spec, so you can say what you like. I won't be offended. But but it's something I guess I've lived for the last 10 years or something since the original pre 2110 specs were written in the VSF. But what's your take on the adoption and use of 2110 in the industry and its maturity? What again, through your lens, how do you see that?
As I said, I started using it mid 2021. So I know it was already a little bit out there. Everyone had kind of like adopted their own version. I think from my perspective, even though it has great potential, and right now, 2025, it feels a lot better than what it was in 2021. There was a lot of like interop issues between different vendors and the way that they were applying the standard to their own systems, right? That we're still seeing it. So one of the ones that I still cannot get rid of, it's the audio differences between 2110 implementations and vendors, right? Um, Even in like the control system, like the control layer of things. Uh, when I first started using it, we had some vendors that weren't, they could only do a conformance level A, I believe,
Yeah,
or they were
yeah,
only doing conformance level B or C. And we had to spend months working towards our control system can only do 4x4 dash 30s. And some of these vendors could not comply to use the 4.4. They were like, we can only take either two dash 30s of 8 audio channels or do one of 16. So I think the audio, the way that we're like grouping audio on 2110, it's still a little bit raw for me, even on the ways, because I remember that I know we've also seen issues where it's like, if it's a 5.1, why are you splitting your channels in like 4 and then the other 2? How can actually your receiver detect that you actually have a 5.1 if they're coming in 2 completely different like IPs, right? So the way that audio is being mapped through 2110, I think it's still improved.
yeah,
When it comes to dash 40, I think auxiliary was also a little bit of a challenge because you know, we come from a world where everything is just embedded in the signal to now there might be an actual device or a system that it's engraving your closed captions. There might be another one that's doing Scotty insertion. So I think Scotty was such an interesting world to get through when 2110 was implemented in the systems.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. So I guess what you're observing there is, I guess one thing is the limited adoption or the adoption of only the subset of the 2110 capability by vendors, and then the onward challenge that gives is the lack of the promised flexibility. Because I have to say, I still think the potential, and and it has got a lot better in the last 5 years. I think there's been
Yes.
leaps, and especially in the control plane. Because my view is, I think we specified an interface fairly effectively, and really almost the control plane was an afterthought, and it was
Yeah.
literally years behind the data plane interfacing. And I think that's almost caused problems because, like you say, if you plug a BNC SDI cable in, your signal appears, but you've got to do
Yes.
an awful lot more once you plug a 10 gig Ethernet cable in to get your picture up. So yeah, I understand the challenge there, but I think the ubiquity is definitely coming together. Um, I think you had some perspectives, if I remember, when we spoke previously about another related standard, which is TRO7. Just for just for everyone's background, very much I think the original concept of how to carry excess compressed flows was going to be as what became TRO8, which was also part of 2110-22, which is a generic wrapper for compressed video essences. Um, and certainly in the initial work I did, both on the standard side and initial vendor implementation, what became TRO8, the dash 22, was seen as the way forward. But I think there's a realistic world of challenge there. I think when you're doing wide area networking, because um, PTP timing and synchronization is essential if you're staying in the 2110 world. And I think one of the things that TR07, which is effectively mapping excess into a transport stream, not dissimilar to how the way TR01 did with JPEG 2000, actually allows for a more traditional transport stream, what I call forward clocking architecture in the way the signals are handled. So are you guys actually using TRO7, and what I think what's your observation so far?
Yes. Great question. Great point. I would say TRO7, it's what I'm used to, both with Fox or Netflix. I've never delved myself into TRO8 because I haven't had the need. So I can say that from the TRO7 perspective, it's, in my opinion, the easiest transportation that we have over the land side. When it comes to how does it work, I think in my previous lives, I've always used where the encode the sender and the receiver are both from the same kind of like system provider vendor.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that makes it a lot easier when it comes to interrupt. But we're trying to build now, or where I think the future of a standard is that we need to make sure, because I think it's relates a little bit back to what we were talking about 2110, right? Where standards are a little vague to the point where everyone can implement in their own version rather than having like very set specifications that said we all play well with each other and our systems are able and capable to receive and work with the other. So I think for tier 7, what we're trying to like do right now is make sure that if anyone who wants to interconnect with us, anyone who wants to create and push the boundaries of I don't want to have physical infrastructure deployed in any of my locations, is that we can cross connect and interconnect through TR7. And by saying that, right, we're starting to see some interrupt issues where um, the system is not playing well with this receiver, or the other way around. I can encode, but I cannot decode. So I think what I would love TR7 to become, it's a place and a standard where anyone who decides to receive or send a feed to, kind of like SRT, right? If I'm sending you a stream, I can receive it and decode it with no problem. Also, I think there's a beautiful variation that we've implemented, which is UHC 29 frames. I think that was something that was left out very specifically from like the JPEG XS TR7 standard, and that not everyone kind of like implemented at the same time. So that's been a very like tough flavor to be able to conform on TR7. And then I think I've heard a lot of people, this is kind of like a lot of people in the industry are pushing for. It's the 32 up to 64 audio channels. So I think another piece of great proposition for the TRO7 committee is how can we expand the 16 audio channels and push it all over to 64 if possible.
Yeah. Okay. Those are some great observations. I will defend the team that developed Terry 7, which I touched on the edges of. Um, and I think there have been a couple of revisions relatively recently, I think specifically to try and improve interoperability, because it's always difficult sitting, having sat on the other side of the fence. You think you've defined something sufficiently to make that work. I think one of the things that's dropped off in the industry in the last 3 years is the number of interops that we do, actually testing events, plug fests between vendors. I mean, having said that, it's actually very easy to do that with PCAP Exchange now. So actually, I think there needs to be, probably, rather than big physical events when people come together, we need to facilitate, basically file exchange, so people can exchange PCAPs of streams, to actually verify interoperability. Either that, or everyone's got to buy everybody else's equipment, which is a bit of a challenge. And hey, I'm not even going to get into joking with you about fractional frame rates in this conversation. We did touch on MXL just a few minutes ago when you were talking about the evolution of 2110, and the way I've been presenting that in the last, as I think you've seen in the last few months, is really like almost a 90 plus years of television with a linear transit, a linear interface, be that analog, be that SDI, be that 2110, on a flow, suddenly becomes, in the MXL world, when you're trying to hand data between compute instances, becomes an asynchronous data exchange mechanism rather than a linear data flow. And I've been quite excited, and I think this is the year that this is really going to come together. I'm excited about some of the stuff we're going to be showing at IBC, some demonstrations and stuff. But from a end user perspective, what's your take on the potential and the use cases of MXL?
Think that Netflix is involved in it. I know we have a couple of my colleagues who are actively investing their time to make sure that MXL is something that will be great not only for the industry but also for the end user on the streaming side. So super excited to hear that MXL keeps moving forward. I think from my perspective particularly, I would say the it's still a little early on for my brain to adapt what the technology would look like, because what you just mentioned, right? We come from there's a linear transmission, like we know you plug in and whatever you're sending is what you're receiving. So moving away from that and having that asynchronous transmission, and being able to receive and send through multiple systems without having to have a physical interface do that is very interesting. I would say the capabilities seem unlimited. I am hoping that MXL or the committee is able to find structure for what that MVP model would look like, right? Like, what are the actual critical needs that we need to solve? Are we going to start with the production side of the house, or are we starting with contribution or distribution, right? So I would be very interested to see what ends up being like the first model that comes out that can be used to start testing interop and seeing how vendors. I would say also the one of the challenges, I think, now that we're moving into UHD and 2110, right? Like the 100 gig interfaces, 400 gig interfaces, like how is MXL going to solve those problems of like the capacity and the bandwidth on certain interfaces, rather than we have enough flexibility that we can transfer UHD, HC, SD, like anything without a problem. I feel like that's one of the big things with 2110, where we've seen a lot of challenges moving from HD to UHD, right? The bandwidth capacity, or even like from what you were talking previously to any 2110 and HD and SD worlds, right? Like, how is MXL going to come in and take those challenges from previous lives and previous protocols and standards and make that better for the industry to keep moving forward?
Yeah. Well, watch this. I mean, watch this space, really. I mean, it's obviously very, very early days at the moment, but I think the potential's great. And there's a podcast I've recently recorded with one of my colleagues in the peer, Ian, that we dive into a little bit more about what's happening. So if you're listening to this podcast and want a little bit more, check my Time for Tea with Ian Wagden, who's one of my colleagues, because we discuss this in a bit more detail. That's cool. Okay, so it's been great to talk about some of the tech, but I think there is also what I perceive when we met up a couple of months ago, a bit of an elephant in the room, because I think my observation was of all of our customers and industry friends that gathered at that session. I think you were the only lady round the table in a very very male dominated discussion, and I have to say that's actually not the only time I've been in that situation. In fact, the very first MXL meeting we had in Geneva, I remember Hans Hoffman standing up and saying what an indictment it was on the industry that there was not a single lady there in that discussion. So you seem probably a little bit isolated. Do you feel isolated, and what are you doing about that?
I don't feel isolated. And the reason why I don't feel isolated is because I found groups that actually support and bring every woman in the technology space together. So I found my peace with it's not just me here. There's a lot more of us. We're just very spread. And I think also from the Netflix perspective, because this has never happened to me before, my team, I think we're like 50% women. So
Wow.
this is absolutely, like, the Netflix recruiting team does such a great job to finding and actually bring in diversity to the team that, I don't feel alone anymore. My team is very, very, very diverse.
Yeah. Well, that's really exciting. I mean, so it sounds like you guys have got your act together in terms of the way you're encouraging and recruiting and formulating that. Have you any observations on the wider media industry and things we should be doing as a collective to kind of address that imbalance?
Yeah, I think to your earlier point, right? Like the amazing peer council that you guys put up together. I was the only female in the room contributing to the actual event, because we did have some peer amazing ladies there as well. But from the actual like end user standpoint, I was the only one, right? Uh, Many other like NABs like meetings and part of like big conferences, I felt myself being the only female who actually has a voice. So I think as a wider industry, there's not even just a gap for women, I think there's a big gap of young talent coming into the industry, right? If I've been noticing a lot more that there is that we're in a situation where there's a lot of people who've done a lot of great contributions to the industry who have been around for so long that the younger generations who are coming in might not have a grasp of what happened before them, right? Like people come with like a software background or an IP background, but they don't fully understand like what everything that you guys have done to the point for us to be able to come in. So, but I at least I'm super active with employee resource groups. I think I know it's been a little challenge of a year for the diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there's a lot of companies who still support those groups and activities. I would say relying on those groups, supporting those groups internally and externally, it's super important. And I'm an active member. I'm a board member of multiple organizations like Rise, which I saw that you
Yeah.
guys, I believe, are
Yep.
now sponsors. So it's amazing.
Absolutely.
And then the Women in Cable and Telecom, WICT, which is another large organization. So I'm a board member for both of them. I mentor people for both organizations. Um, Young women who are coming either in their university years or just coming fresh out of college and trying to find a job. So I would say this is something that I encourage everyone to do at the same time. It's very easy for us to put a little bit of help into the organizations, either internally or externally. Like I said, there's many groups who are supporting women. I think what we as industry should be doing better is extending our reach, extending our learnings and our actual knowledge. I think there's a lot of people that hold so much power and so many great stories about how have you come here, right? Including you, Andy. And like this kind of like even this podcast brings that opportunity of people to be more aware of where are our gaps and how to help. So I would say if anyone is interested in becoming part, helping, mentoring, extending, sponsoring anything women in tech related, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to either help or point to the right person in any country. These two organizations I mentioned, Rights and WICT, they both are global. So they have their European based organization, they have their US based, the Latin American based. So don't feel like if you're in a different region than I am or India is, it means that you cannot help. There's ways to help in any part of the world. And there's also like many little different skill sets that we bring to the table, right? I think from the being young women in the technology space, you tend to see things differently. So I think one of my biggest fundamentals when I'm helping in these kind of projects or programs is to make sure that people realize that there is a possibility and there's someone that looks like them that's able to do the thing. So if I'm able, you're able, and anyone can do it. So just helping everyone out there who might feel insecure or even like doubtful, right? Because I don't know if you feel this way, Andy, but I feel the younger generations don't even understand what broadcast is. I don't think there's a lot out there in like colleges in general and like the university space that details exactly what broadcast is. And I think it makes sense now, right? Because broadcast is now not just like RF, it's not just IP, it's not software, it's a little bit of everything. So how can they bundle all of the technologies that we've encompassed in broadcast and put them in a program for someone to learn?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you. And if anyone wants to reach out, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Really appreciate that. It's been great to catch up with you again. And hopefully, people will have found that inspirational. I'm sure they have. And thanks again. And I look forward to catching up with you later in the year. Thank you very much, Val. Take care.
Thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate the time.